Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'm going to finish off my little picture in Hanna Karlzon's Tales from Atlantis, and we're going to finish off this little name page here. I am sorry it's taken me so long to get this page done for you guys, but more on that later, so let's get started. Now I did end up deciding to make the shell gold. In hindsight, I'm not sure if that was a good idea. There are certain things that I probably would change if I did this again, but I will explain those as they happen. So I've started on the highlight, and what I would have done once I was finished would be to actually leave this little highlight here white and blank and just sort of done this color literally on either side of that little line that I'm doing. That way I would have had a little bit more of a pronounced highlight, and I just feel it would have worked a little bit better. I'm not saying that this didn't work, it's just I kind of just felt like it was a little bit too dark. I did end up correcting this with some acrylic paint later on. And what I forgot to tell you is I am using my Polychromos pencils like I did on my little seahorses. So I'm just going to start working my way out into that little dip in the shell there, and I'm just going to gradually go darker and darker, and obviously that little dip down the bottom there, that will be my darkest, my shaded area, just because I want to give that sort of scalloped edge. can see at the current point I'm having a relatively light area in the center, and I really wish I had continued on with a much lighter center. What I ended up doing is that I made those lines run all the way through the shell. Instead, I wish I'd used a really light color, even like an ivory or something like that, and just had that very lightly sort of in the center there without the lines that I'm doing now. So that was sort of one of my other sort of little regrets. Again, I went in and put a bit of acrylic paint over it and fixed it up a little bit, but it still didn't look as nice as it would have done if I hadn't done these lines, but just went in very gently with a much more even layer of color. So I'm just changing over into my burnt ochre, And once again, I wish I'd obviously didn't pull this down as far as I did. I obviously went pretty much all the way through, but just sort of pulled it a little bit further than those lines, but not much further than that. I think that would have worked a little bit better. But as you can see, like the gold color here is totally fine. So I'm kind of making it a bit like an antique-y kind of gold. You can also go, it probably was maybe a little bit too much ochre in there, but at the same time it still works. But if you want a little bit more muted sort of gold that it doesn't have as much yellow, you can go with more of your lighter brown tones rather than all of the ochre colors. So I'm just going to darken up these little grooves here, and I actually quite like how this started out. I went down, that's roughly where I'm stopping there. It's actually a really pretty good spot to stop, and if I hadn't done those lines all the way through, I think that would have actually looked really nice, just the way it is there. I did go in a little bit later with some darker colors, and I think that might have made it a little bit too harsh, but at the same time I'm not completely hating it. I think this part here is really nice, so I would have definitely done this part here again, exactly where I'm stopping it here, and then sort of left that center part again. So here I've pretty much worked my way up from my lightest color to my darkest, and then what I usually do is I work my way back again and overlap everything again, and it gives really nice layers. What I again should have done here is to reduce some of the ochre colors that I ended up layering on at the very end, because it ended up quite yellow. But I'm still like the way it is at the moment. I'm not hating it, but again, this is like a how to try not to hate your picture 101. I don't know. I feel here I kind of pulled this color down a little bit too far. I should have stuck with just doing this up the top here and just left it further down instead of bringing this color down past the words. I think that was probably a little bit too far, but again, hindsight is always, it's always there, and we always pick apart our things. But you live and you learn, and I think I definitely learned a whole lot about doing this piece and what I would do differently next time. So that's always a good thing. Now, if I had stopped here, I probably would have been fine. But then I sort of started from here on. I started going much further down, and I kind of, yeah, look at me now. So I'm bringing down this burnt ochre, and it is just making that center area where I'm going to put obviously my name a little bit too patterned. I should have just left it the way it was and not played with it too much. Sometimes you can play with things a bit too much, and this was one of those times. Had it not been an area where I needed to put something like my name, it might have been fine, but having too much patterns and stuff behind writing kind of takes away from what you want to put on there. So I really should not have pulled these lines all the way through down to the bottom. So here I went in with the light yellow ochre, and this is probably where, again, in hindsight, looking back, I probably could have gone with more of a lighter brown tone that didn't have all that ochre in it. I feel like it's too much sort of that yellow ochre kind of color in there, and it just became a little bit too much. So using more of a muted brown tone probably would have toned this down a little bit more, because this is obviously a very yellow gold, and you could definitely reduce the amount of yellows by using more of those light brown tones instead. So because at this point I was starting to get a bit worried that the patterns down the middle there was a bit too much, so I ended up adding a little bit of black just up the top, just to draw a bit more attention to that scalloped edge at the top, instead of all the lines going down the center. Now I hate using erasers on my pictures because I just feel like it removes more than what I want, so I didn't end up erasing any of that center part, but I did go over it, as I said, with some acrylic paint, and I'll show you how I did that a bit later on. So at this point I kind of knew I had to put this piece down for a little bit just to have a think about what I wanted to do with it. And in the meantime, I went ahead and bought this art desk to change the location of where I do my artwork, to give myself a little bit more light. Unfortunately, in the process of picking up this lovely desk, the tabletop of this actually comes up, so it can stand up at like something like maybe like a 60-degree angle or something like that. As we were moving it, it kind of tipped and the whole plate fell open and hit me right on the head, and it gave me a mild concussion. So that's why it's now been a few more extra days. So here we are again, and I'm going to try and save this with a bit of titanium white acrylic paint. So I'm going to add in some little lines coming out the side here, and I'm going to make some highlights in those areas I wanted to leave more blank after I'd of course put the coloring pencils down on it. So these are some of the brushes I've got. I don't know if I'll use all of them, but I've got like a little small size 1 and size 0 paintbrush, and then I've got my bigger sort of flat brush as well. I'll probably be using those a bit more than that other little filbert brush. We'll see what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to start out with this number 1, and I'm just going to start adding in some little highlight. You can see it's relatively fine, so I'm going just down the center here and just adding a little bit of this acrylic paint to get that contrast between the lights and the darks. I just could not be bothered squeezing out any paint, so I just sort of very gently put a little bit onto the tip, and then just started adding just some little sort of highlighty areas. I'm also thinking I do have this metallic watercolor paint that has lots of different kind of gold tones, and one of those colors is, I got a light gold and a white gold as part of those, and I'm thinking those might be something I can put on top of this acrylic paint. So we'll see how we do that. So I'm sort of looking at this now, and I'm just going to, as I said, add in the highlights, and then we'll see how it all ends up. Hopefully we can save this. So I've just changed over to my flat brush now, and I've just added a little bit of paint just to the very tip, and I'm just going to start kind of following the highlight that's already there in that watercolor paint that I've got, and I'm just going to drag some lines out sort of here and there. Don't worry if you're adding a little bit to the extra to the shell. When you're adding this acrylic paint on top of your, especially onto the shell where we have the oil-based pencils, you can literally actually just use your fingernail and you can scrape off anything that you don't want there. It's a little bit different onto the watercolor paper. It'll be harder to scrape it off, but if you, as I said, add something to the shell that you don't want there, you can just go ahead and scrape it off. So I decided to add some acrylic paint into that center. So I'm just going to mix it out a little bit. I'm putting it out a little bit now, and I'm just going to use my other little brush and just see how this goes. I just thought I'll just see how fine I can get it. And then I'll just add a little bit of color just over the top of it. It's just to try and help tone down those really, really big kind of stripy areas just at the back, just so we can actually see the writing. So while all that paint dries, I decided to go in with some Indanthrene blue. This is my Polychromos, not my Albrecht Dura pencils. And just go over these sort of watercolor areas. And I just wanted to add some like little sort of shady areas, just sort of here and there, just to create a little bit of a contrast to those sort of white highlighted areas. So I'm sort of almost thinking of this as like adding in like little blood vessels, you know, how those sort of, I don't know, I'm trying to explain. It's almost like, yeah, mixed between like little blood vessels and branches almost. So as I'm coming in towards the sort of shell, I'm just branching it out a little bit and going in really sort of thin lines, and then adding more color as we're going further out where we have our dark areas. I kind of want to just have more of a contrast and getting more shadows in around the edges of the picture. as you can see, the lines that I'm dragging in, they're not dead straight or anything. I kind of try to be deliberately a little bit sort of sloppy, just so they look a little bit more natural and not like dead straight. So even if you almost shake your hand a little bit, not shake it, but you know what I mean. Almost think of it like a tiniest little bit of a tremor on that little tip, just so it kind of looks a little bit more random. You can obviously also do this with Albrecht Dürer, like with your watercolor pencils, and a super fine brush. There are some of those brushes, I am not super well versed in the paintbrush lingo, but there are some of the brushes that have this really long sort of brush that are really fine, and they are really good at making these sort of uneven lines a little bit and make them look a little bit more natural. And they're great for things like branches and stuff, and they would work out really well for this as well. So I showed you all the top part of this. I'm going to do exactly the same all the way around down the bottom as well. So as you can see, it's not overly complicated. Just do exactly what you've done here. You could probably even pull those lines in a little bit further if you want to. So it's time for me to try and add a little bit of color to the top of this acrylic paint in the center here. It is nice and dry. I've got the cream color here. I'm just sort of adding a little bit. I'm not going too crazy. I just wanted to, as I said, just tone down those stripy effects that I had in the center. So I'm still adding a little bit of the stripes, but they're just much more light. So I did try to add some little sort of sparkly areas, but I did end up scraping off a whole lot of that anyway. I didn't like it, so don't worry about doing this if you don't want to. You could even do this with a Posca pen if you wanted to and you wanted to have a little bit more control. I just found that it just became a little bit too thick, so I ended up scraping most of this off. So I just decided to go ahead and drag those lines down a little bit further, just to again get that contrast between those highlights that were painted in and these darker areas. It just gives it a little something extra, I think, and it just made me like the picture a little bit more than I was at the time. So these ones here are my metallic gold, so you can see I've got lots of different shades. I'm thinking this white gold here and maybe the light gold next to it will probably be my main one. This is the brand of those colors, and I trying to think, I think actually I got them from a local art supply store, but they might be available on Amazon or something like that, so you could always go and have a look. So I just started out with that white gold and just started layering just some little lines on top of those white acrylic areas that I did. And you might not see it too well now, but it's definitely really nice and shimmery. I will, at the end, I will show you in some different angles with the camera, and you'll be able to see how nice and shimmery it is. So as you can see, I also ended up doing all those little dots, little bubble dots as that white gold as well. But I want to go in with the light gold as well. So I'm thinking of doing those on those little kind of starry things there. I think that will work out all right. So I completely forgot about that little thing down the middle there, just between the tails. So I'll just quickly, I'd already started putting a bit of colour on there, so I thought I'll quickly show you that while I'm down here as well. But I just ended up with a little bit of light gold on there, just to sort of give it a little bit of something extra, and just leaving a little bit of a white highlight in the center of each of those little scallops. Alright, I think we're done. I'm gonna write my name off camera and then I'll show you where or how this all looks. So here you go. I thought I'll show you like in a couple of different angles so you can actually see the sort of sparkly. There we go. Now you can kind of see that this got that white gold sort of sparkly shine on there. I think that actually worked out pretty well. I don't know how well it translated onto camera, but anyway, I've got my names on there and you can see it. It's not totally overpowered with the background. Could it be better? Yes, it could, but at least I'm not completely hating it. So that was a lesson in 101 how to try to fix up something when you mess stuff up. I thank you all so much for watching. I wish you all a colourful day and I will see you again next time.